Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trubergy, also known as Byron Assidious. I first wrote this for Substack. I will be publishing it on my Substack probably tomorrow, but I'm going to go ahead and read and present this on video for you here. The Schizo says, "Make Asylums great again." Hello there, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in the world or when this comes across your eyeballs. Most of you reading or listening to this are regulars of mine, and what you're going to read here or hear here isn't exactly news per se, though it may cause a moment's consideration regarding whether or not you took me seriously when I brought up the subject before. I imagine one or two thought that I was just being either facetious or self-deprecating, or that I was building up a kind of fictitious character background for myself. I was not. My name is Joshua T. Calkins Trubergy, and I am a delusional/paranoid schizophrenic. This is not hyperbole or myth building. This is the diagnosis I have been given by psychiatrists in the field, beginning with the folks at Wilford Hall Medical Center, the hospital at the Lackland Air Force Base just outside of San Antonio, Texas. The precise wording on my DD-214 discharge papers was psychosis NOS, meaning not otherwise specified, because at the time, in late August of 2001, they wanted a civilian practitioner to drill down to an underlined prognosis that could be stamped to my civilian sector medical records. For their own purposes at the DoD, again at that time, they wanted to just get the bare bones on the books so that they could process my administrative discharge and classify me as reentry code JFX2C, meaning that I am never going to be eligible for a reentry to military service. In short, I tried to be in the military. After a few weeks, there was an incident, during which I was observed interacting with reality in a way that was not what one would designate as normal. Almost 60 airmen, including NCOs in charge of training, saw me holding court with creatures that were not there, that are not real, and trying to cut my own arm open. Yes, trigger warning, I suppose, self-harm, but this is ancient history now. But I was trying to talk to things that were not there, including Quoth. Obviously, you can't let that young man carry on with a weapon and the authority granted to a member of the United States Armed Forces. You just can't. Had I known already that I had something unusual about my personal thought process? Yes, I had known, though what precisely was only suspected by a few friends and family members, given my family history. But I had coping mechanisms that I had already begun relying upon, and I assumed that those would be good enough to keep my shit together for a prosperous career in the military. I assumed wrong. That didn't work out. Since that long ago time, I have only had a couple of other major psychotic breaks with reality. Episodes, as they tend to be dubbed in the psychiatric community. And look, I'll be blunt with you folks. When I lose touch with reality, it is apparently not a pretty sight. The upside? I can tell most of the time when such a break is going to happen. It's a little like the smell of crackling ozone just before a thunderstorm. I get this tingling in my scalp and my hands that informs me that despite taking my medication and partaking of therapeutic talk sessions that I'm recommended, things inside of my brain are, every now and then, just going to go pop. So what do I do when I feel such a thing coming on? I tell my wife. I tell my counselor. And then I get the hell away from everybody and minimize contact with people. I remove anything from my immediate vicinity that could be used as a crude weapon, too, because years of martial arts training has taught me that damned near anything stiff enough and with at least 4 or 5 inches of length can be used as an impact rod, and you could do a fairly horrendous amount of damage to the average human body with just that in hand and a few seconds opportunity. You can crush someone's larynx or their windpipe with a single impact jab if you've got enough forward force. This is not a brag. I am, technically speaking, a potentially dangerous person under the right circumstances. As such, I minimize the odds of those circumstances ever surfacing and causing pain and suffering to others around me. That's the brag here, people. Though it's not one that I can even lay claim to in its entirety. As my psychiatrist has informed me, I represent about 1 in 50 paranoid schizophrenics, and that my neurochemical profile is composed such that, through no active or conscious effort of my own, I sense when a break is about to happen to me. Most schizophrenics do not benefit from this boon, and sadly, per what little literature I've been able to track down regarding this phenomenon, most of us who do have this leg up don't ever even bother to make the most of it, instead throwing their hands up and claiming helplessness over their illness. And this is infuriating, because it is literally ignoring the one saving grace that some of us have access to. And though I risk the boomerang effect for advocating for it, I am now going to reference the title of this piece. For the sake of society, we need to make mental asylums a thing we utilize once more. I know I didn't say the thing, Peter Griffin, but I'm paraphrasing here for the sake of avoiding catchphrase fever. But Josh, this could hit you too. Yeah, I'm well aware of that, folks. And believe you me, as a working father with 4 kids at home, I don't want anything to risk me being taken away from them. My kids don't always like me, but that's because my wife and I have rules, boundaries, expectations for their behavior and their day-to-day doings. There are privileges taken away when they break the rules. They get grounded. Access to certain favorite toys and games and whatnot are revoked for unannounced periods of time. We don't tell them how long they're grounded for or from XYZ thing, because we don't want them thinking that they can just wait it out. They never get to know until the time is over and served. And we will actively remind them of their groundings too. You may ask, well, isn't that cruel? Kind of like rubbing salt in the wound? No, it's called responsibility. It's called discipline. And these kids, they need to learn that when you break the rules, there are consequences. You may wonder what this has to do with the premise of this essay. Everything, folks. It has everything to do with it. You see, I could quite possibly do something stupid or weird or heinous, and a lot of bleeding heart types would quickly point to my diagnosis and say, it wasn't his fault. They would be wrong, dead wrong. Because the fact of the matter is, maybe I wouldn't be legally culpable in the whole. Sure, I'll grant your premise there. But as I indicated before, I usually get a kind of early warning from my own brain that something's about to go haywire. So I need to get to an environment where I can minimize the risk to myself or other people. That's called taking accountability for your goddamn self. I actively, consciously prepare Plan B scenarios. I have to. For the sake of my wife and my children and the general public writ large. That's my responsibility. My wife and I have discussed what happens if I should ever suffer a break and don't seem to be coming out of it anytime soon. Involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility. End of argument, until such time as I'm able to settle back into reality. If the break does not clear within a 3-year period, if I'm gone that far on mental vacation, I have authorized her to have me declared permanently unfit and to sever any ties and as many as she can legally, because to compel her to my unconscious care or whims beyond that would be sadistic on my part. If that sounds extreme to you, remember this. I am wholly aware that it sounds extreme. But it is my duty to my family and to the species as a whole to accept that at a certain point, done is done, even for myself. At 43 years of age, however, and having dealt with hallucinations and some rather odd beliefs at times, I've never actively aggressed against my fellow man. I've never started a fight. I have not engaged in wanton criminal behavior. I do not excuse myself for my occasional verbal outbursts of oddity or making people uncomfortable or worried about my sanity when things slip a little sideways, which is a common enough occurrence. Trust me, there are folks at my job who suspect that something is up with me because of some of the things that come out of my mouth. But they also largely know that I am a fiction author, and most of them, I think, just chalk it up to running through my thought process out loud. Thank Christ for that. My point with all of this is as follows. If I can be nuttier than a granola bar, yet still have a loving wife and children, work a regular job, pay my taxes, maintain this house, though we need to get somebody in here to repair the foundation work down in the basement. I can't do that myself. If I can manage all that, then what is the excuse for someone like the cretin who slaughtered a harmless Ukrainian refugee woman on a public transport in Charlotte? Even in baseball. When a team is at bat in a baseball game, the batters in a lineup order can swing and miss the pitch 3 times before they are declared out. 3 strikes, you're out. The Charlotte Maniac had enough strikes to put his team back into the outfield, earn another out for the next inning, and 2/3 of another out. At what point do people in the court system he's remanded to take a look at this guy and say, no, you don't get to participate with the rest of society like any regular Joe anymore? Especially when there is video footage of what he did this time to Irina Zarutska. There should not even be a trial. He was caught on video doing it, and caught on audio in the aftermath saying, and I am quoting here, yeah, I got that white girl. A train car full of potential victims of his violent madness, but he did nothing until a white girl got on. And Van Jones wants to act like a full-force retard on CNN and claim that we don't know if race had anything to do with it? No, that'd be like if I went outside, shot an arrow through every large black bird that looked even slightly like a raven, and somebody saying it had nothing to do with ravens, he just wanted to kill birds, man. No, ravens and crows only. Some of the bigger ones, if they look a little too much like old Feathers McGee, fuck him and the circus that he rode into my skull on. But also, side note here, if I did that, I fully expect and hope that my wife would have me checked into a facility. If I did that, at least for a few days, until I got my shit back under control. The worst I've done since buying this house 5 years ago was once going outside and throwing my shoe at a crow that had landed in our front yard, hollering at him to go back to Quoth and quit spying on me. The neighbors probably thought that was a touch weird if they witnessed it. Might be why we don't get invited to too many social gatherings around here all that much, but I digress. The point is, yes, the Charlotte Maniac scumbag, I will not say his real name, he does not deserve a human title, has a history of mental health problems. Yes, this likely contributed to his many, many infractions of the law and his numerous charges, convictions, and sentences served for those crimes. But at a certain point, we have to accept as a society that some folks are just too broken to be permitted to go back into said society. Yeah, that might end up being my own fate someday. This could boomerang and hit me. As a person who doesn't always have properly firing neurochemical signals in my skull. But right now, being lucid, medicated, and trying to be responsible in my thought process, I'm going to reiterate this for all of you. Being mentally ill is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Does it make normal daily life a little more challenging? Maybe, sometimes. Though I've used it for a lot of free mileage in my time as a horror and fantasy storyteller. Some of my best written Amelia City scenes have been lifted wholesale from my own hallucinations over the years. Eugene the Technicolor Cow is one of my favorites. Taking charge of and responsibility for oneself and one's actions and circumstances is something that needs to be drilled into all of us, and from a young age. Why do you think I mentioned before the punishments my wife and I dole out to our own children? Because unless you establish behavioral guidelines and expectations early on, the odds are good that if the curse of oddment should touch your own child later in life, they will have legal problems at a much higher rate than, quote, normal children. Okay? A person's outcomes are not down to nature alone or nurture alone. They are a composite of nature and nurture. Joshua Chu hurt itself in its confusion. Pokemon reference for this last section. I realize that I'm not likely garnering any new fans or regular readers or listeners for this piece, and might possibly be alienating some of my recent regulars. But every now and then, I have to push through the clamoring nonsense of the day's current events news and comment upon certain situations and circumstances. I prefer to just be that genre fiction guy, but I'm not exactly making waves in that arena, so really, what's the harm? Josh Slocum of the Disaffected Substack and Rumble Weekly podcast, give him a look and listen to, folks, often remarks that people need to be held accountable for their own bad behavior, and that we need to, as a society, stop giving in to the narcissistic demands and egos of bad actors, regardless of race, sex, gender identity, etc. I would propose that this needs to extend to folks who like to parade around the self-directed label of neurodivergent, because it is no longer cute or clever, folks. If you think it's cute or clever, I advise you to go over to X and watch the video of Irina Zarutska being butchered, and the footage that follows, where her lifeblood spreads further and further in a pool on the floor. A neurodivergent person fucking did that to her, and there is no amount of, but he's just hurt people, from the mouths of self-righteous retards like Van fucking Jones that can hand-wave it away. The Charlotte maniac brought a penknife with him onto public transport, spotted a small, unassuming young woman of slender frame and with no obvious means of self-defense, ambushed her with shock stabs to a vital area, and then wandered away whilst she bled out. I don't want this guy to waste away in a jail cell at taxpayers' expense for the rest of his natural days. I want his natural days ended. Whether by lethal injection, electric chair, firing squad, I don't give a tin shit. The amount of leeway given to this freak because of his mental illness has long since been exhausted. He should never have been in that spot to do what he did, to begin with. An involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility for the rest of his days should have been handed down to him a long time ago. And if I did anything even a quarter as violent as what he did, while suffering a psychotic break, I would want and expect the same to be done to me. From one schizophrenic to the society writ large. Make Asylums great again. Cheers.